Hi, welcome to the channel. Today's video is titled Every Country England Has Invaded Visualized. I think I've kind of checked this video before, but it's been a while. So yeah, we're gonna check it now again. And somebody also recommended I check this video as well. So yeah, we are revisiting this video over again. So yeah, we're gonna check this together and I love your thoughts and your contribution in the comments below. Let's dive right in.
This video is made possible.
Okay, I think there goes an ad. Yep. Oh, go forward now. No, it's supposed to go back a bit.
Good chunk of the past few centuries, this music was the final boss music played for people across the entire world. The English and later the British have been responsible for invading and conquering more countries and people than any other nation in human history. And honestly, it's startling just how many places they've been to. In this video, I'm going to do my best at attempting to visualize all of Britain's invasions and conquests for you, continent by continent, in as brief a time as possible. So let's begin with the closest continent to Britain, Europe. Ireland was the first target of British conquest and was invaded as early as 1169. Within 400 years of gradual conquests, the entire island was ruled by the British and remained that way until most of it was granted independence in 1921. Historically, France has probably been invaded by the English more times than any other country in the world.
Wow.
Just take a look at this huge list of invasions. There's
Wow,
not even enough
we can
time.
see invasion of Brittany, down to French War, Napoleonic War, War of Austrian Succession, French Revolutionary War. I like that. I like to check a video on that. I would like to check a video on that. Maybe War of the Austrian Succession too, as well, right? Anglo-French War. Oh, we've got lots of interesting videos to do to check.
Invasions. There's not even enough time to talk about a third of these, and for a time, all of this territory inside of modern France was directly controlled by the English, with Calais being the final piece that fell in 1557.
Oh.
Well, except for that time when the British took over Corsica for a couple years. The British continue to invade Spain by the
Where's Corsica? Where's Corsica? Who
was
and who
directly
is
controlled by
Corsica?
the English, with Calais being the final piece that fell in 1557. Well, except for that time when the British took over Corsica for a couple years. The British continue to invade Spain by the millions every winter, but in the past, they've come with a lot less friendly intentions. English and later British soldiers invaded under the Black Prince in 1367 and continued on through the first, second, third, and fourth raids on Cadiz and that time when the British took over Gibraltar and Minorca. They gave Minorca back, but decided on keeping Gibraltar forever.
Who is Minorca? I know all these are old ancient names, but we need to know the names like current modern times, if that makes sense,
Fourth
right?
raids on Cadiz and that time when the British took over Gibraltar and Minorca. They gave Minorca back, but decided on keeping Gibraltar forever. In recent history, the British have invaded Belgium in order to support the Belgians.
Okay.
But that wasn't always the case. They conducted two pretty large-scale invasions of modern-day Belgium in 1654 and again in 1701. And Flanders itself was ruled by the English for a few years in the 14th century. The Netherlands was one of England's historical arch rivals, and so there's been plenty of invasions going in this direction across the 17th and 18th centuries. In 1940, the British technically invaded and took over Iceland peacefully for a year in order to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Germans. But this was heavily protested by the Icelandic government at the time, so in my books it still counts as an invasion. Italy, of course, was invaded by the British Army during the Second World War as well in 1943, but there were plenty of invasions before then, dating back to Richard the Lionheart's invasion in 1190. Germany.
Wait, the Napoleonic War also in with Italy. Let me see. Okay, Napoleonic War, Anglo-Russian invasion, War of Austria Succession. They were affected too. Hmm? I want to know.
Invasion in 1190. Germany, too, was obviously invaded by the British Army in 1945, and northwestern Germany was occupied by the British for 3 years until 1948. But a lot of German territory was ruled by Britain long before the
But wait. Based on knowledge and the information that I've read, or from videos that I've seen regarding the formation of um the history of England and so forth, and how Great Britain came together, I want to believe that some of these countries also like how am I going to put it? How am I going to say it the right way? Some of these countries like also like entered the right English, entered these countries, right, to like get some of the land or whatever. That I believe they also like came in first, or came in before the British, like, or England, or English, or England like came. So it was more like a land grab or something, especially within this France, Germany, Netherlands, these regions, especially those, right? hmm hmm Those, because Germany, Romans, as Italy, these people played like significant roles in terms of history. Germany, Netherlands, Italy, which happened to be rich, Rome, yes, and France, they played significant role in history, right? For the good, when you look at it, like like when you look at it, you see, notice that some of these countries, like the fact that they're still standing today, some of these countries or some of these nations, let me just say nations, some of these nations, the fact that they are standing today, like the amount of history they hold is mind blowing.
before then. The islands of Heligoland were
What
British
is
for
this?
most of the 19th century, and the
Heligoland.
Kingdom of Hanover was effectively ruled under a personal union for over a century between 1714 and 1837. Austria was also invaded in 1945, and the southwest of the country was occupied for a decade. Norway was invaded in 1810 and 1812 during the Napoleonic Wars, when it was a part of Denmark-Norway, because Denmark was aligned to France, so obviously Denmark was invaded during that time as well. Finland, Estonia, and Latvia were all briefly invaded by small units during the Crimean War against Russia because they were all part of the Russian Empire at the time, and of course, Russia itself was invaded then too, as well as in 1918 when the British took over a large chunk of northern Russia for a time in their fight against the Bolsheviks. The territory
What? Britain, no, not get mind though. Eh? See, look at them. See where they are. Just look at where they are. Small. Small.
because they were all part of the Russian Empire at the time, and of course, Russia itself was invaded then too, as well as in 1918 when the British took over a large chunk of northern
1918.
Russia for a time in their fight against the Bolsheviks. The territory of modern Ukraine was invaded by British army units during the Crimean War. The British took over the Croatian island of Vis between 1807 and 1814 during their fight
Who
against
is Vis?
Napoleon. The British army had boots and guns on the ground in Bosnia recently between 1992 and 95 fighting against the Bosnian Serbs, and around the same time, the RAF also carried out bombing strikes against Serbian Serb targets in Serbia in 1999. Montenegro was briefly blockaded and invaded in 1913 during the First Balkan War. The British owned the westernmost Ionian islands of Greece between 1815 and 1863 before they gave them back, while Bulgaria was invaded and almost entirely occupied by the British Army between 1918 and 1919 at the end of World War I. Cyprus was a British protectorate between 1878 and 1914 when they decided to just outright annex it to piss off the Turks, and it remained annexed until 1960, except for two small chunks that are still British today. Turkey itself was massively invaded by the British during World War I, and part of it was occupied between 1919 and 1923. That wraps up Europe, so let's move on to Asia next. Modern-day Israel and Palestine, as well as Jordan, were British-controlled from the end of World War I to 1948 and 1946 respectively. Lebanon and Syria were both occupied from the Vichy French government briefly during World War II. Iraq was ruled between 1919 and 1932 and invaded again during the Second World War, and again in 1991, and again in 2003. Kuwait was a colony for over
There are other few countries that were not mentioned here. I mean, I'm talking about Europe, right? That were not mentioned here. Just look at where um, England, Britain is. Look at where they are, and look at the other places. Small, small but mighty. If small but mighty, if you're looking for the definition of small but mighty, you know who to find, or you know who it is, or what it is.
World War, and again in 1991, and again in 2003. Kuwait was a
2003.
colony for over 60 years until 1966. Georgia and Azerbaijan were both invaded and occupied right at the end of World War I for a year. Iran has been invaded at least 3 times, with the most notable example being the joint Anglo-Soviet invasion of 1941. Turkmenistan was invaded in 1918 to prevent Bolshevik influence from spreading any further. Afghanistan is a favorite British invasion
Wow.
spot since it's been invaded in 1839, 1878, 1919, and again in 2001. Qatar,
2001.
Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman were all controlled by the British until the early 1970s, while a chunk of Yemen was controlled for over a century between 1839 and 1967. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka were all, of course, invaded many times and outright ruled by the British Empire in parts for nearly 2 centuries between 1757 and 1947. Nepal was invaded in 1814 but never successfully conquered. Bhutan was invaded in 1772 and again in 1864 and was sort of conquered as a protectorate between 1910 and 1948. Burma/Myanmar was invaded in 1826 and was definitely successfully conquered and ruled through 1947. Thailand was briefly invaded in 1945 since they were allied to Japan in World War II, and so was Vietnam in the same year, but that was to support the French government against the growing independence movement. Malaysia and Singapore were each conquered and ruled up until the 1950s and 1960s. Brunei was conquered and ruled up until the 1980s, whereas the Philippines were briefly invaded during the 7 Years' War. China got invaded a lot, and Hong Kong was a colony until as recently as 1997. And while not outright invaded, part of Japan was occupied following World War II between 1946 and 1952. And finally, Indonesia was invaded a bunch during the Napoleonic Wars since it was a Dutch colony aligned to France at the time. Next up, Oceania. Australia and New Zealand, of course, were invaded by the British and established as colonies that each gained independence in 1931. Papua New Guinea was also a British colony for a time, as were the island countries of Fiji, Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. Let's move back over to Africa next, which the British
Nigeria
have
is here.
violently visited a lot. In terms of just places the British outright colonized after invasions, there's the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, along with parts of modern-day Somalia and Guinea. Senegal was briefly invaded and had some of their coastline taken over in the 1700s, while during the Second World War, the British invaded the French colonies of Djibouti, Madagascar, and Comoros after they aligned themselves with the Nazi Vichy regime, and the Italian colonies of Libya, Eritrea, and Ethiopia. Although
Wow. 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 I think I checked a video that was it how strong the British Empire is. I'm not sure what the title of the video. Or I'm like, just look at where they are. Small, tiny, small, just an island, just there. But the power they hold, they possess, and they're still standing today. It's mind blowing. If small but mighty, like if you're looking for the definition of small but mighty, know what it is. What it is. And I said it's like in history, part of things that happened in history is mostly about land grab or land. And sometimes when people hear this thing, let me just say this because I also plan to say this at the end of the video, but I also want to say this like sometimes when people hear this, some people just associate it to be the bad, right? But sometimes when you weigh both sides, you look at it like, okay, there are some good things that they also did, and there are some not so nice things. But I don't like to always associate it to be collective, to be group people, because one person, sometimes the good things that somebody might have done, just one person might just come and spoil it and do one bad thing, and that bad thing might just cloud everything, and people like to associate the bad to something more than the good, right? And for this, based on some of the knowledge that I've gathered, right, I see that some of these, they did it for the good of some of the, or for the best good interest of some of these nations today, because without this, some nations wouldn't have gained their independence, if we're being honest, and that's just the truth. Some nations wouldn't have gained their independence, right? Right, but still, they're small island just there. I think I said in another video, like, if they wanted to own more land mass than what they own today, don't you think they would have? They would have, because there was enough land for them to grab, but they didn't. Right? They didn't.
Hundreds, while during the Second World War, the British invaded the French colonies of Djibouti, Madagascar, and Comoros after they aligned themselves with the Nazi Vichy regime, and the Italian colonies of Libya, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, although they had also invaded Ethiopia much earlier in 1868. And as German colonies right before World War I, the British also invaded Togo and Cameroon without annexing them afterwards. For the final area of the world left to discuss,
America.
let's move over to the Americas. All of Canada was a British colony until 1931, while Newfoundland remained until 1949. The United States, of course, was a colony until 1776, and was invaded again in 1812, and the modern states of Oregon and Washington were claimed right up until 1846. As far as other outright British colonies here go, there was the Bahamas, Jamaica, Belize, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis,
Wow.
Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. Besides colonies, Cuba was invaded and occupied during the Seven Years' War in 1762. Haiti was invaded in 1793 during the French Revolutionary Wars. The Dominican Republic was invaded way back in 1655 in an attempt at conquest under Oliver Cromwell. Parts of the east coast of Honduras and Nicaragua were conquered and ruled for nearly 2 centuries until 1819. They sent the Navy to invade Mexico in 1861 to force them to repay some debts, and during
They invaded Mexico. This is the first time I'm hearing it. Mexico? Really?
Oliver Cromwell, parts of the east coast of Honduras and
Mexico?
Nicaragua were conquered and ruled for nearly 2 centuries until 1819. They sent the Navy to invade Mexico in 1861 to force them to repay some debts, and during the
1861.
splendidly named War of Jenkins Year, aka the more lame-sounding War of the Austrian Succession, the British invaded a lot of Spain's colonies, including Panama, a huge one into Colombia, and ultimately Peru. In 1796, the British took over Suriname because it was a Dutch colony, and they were allied with the revolutionary French and later Napoleon. They also invaded Martinique and Guadeloupe because they actually were French during the Napoleonic Wars. Venezuela was invaded in 1902 as part of the so-called Venezuela crisis to force the country to repay some debts they had defaulted on, kind of like Mexico, while Argentina and Uruguay were both invaded during the Napoleonic Wars as well in 1806, when Spain and her colonies were still allied with Napoleon. And that pretty much sums up all of the territory the British have ever ruled and all of the countries this small island has ever invaded. There are a total of 65 countries today who celebrate
65. 65. And that's just a small island. Small fraction. 65 countries. I don't know why I'm smiling, but I'm just trying to like mentally process it. Like, this very small island.
ruled and all of the countries this small island has ever invaded. There are a total of 65 countries today who celebrate their independence days from the British Empire. The Empire used to rule over a quarter of all the world's land at the same time and was the biggest empire in human history. And in total, today, there have been 117 modern countries that have been aggressively invaded by the British Armed Forces during some point in their histories, representing a total of 60% of all the world's nations, which is almost the same number of countries that you can watch this video in. YouTube is available in 130 countries now, or about 2/3 2/3 of them, but the algorithm that YouTube uses won't always work the way you think or want it to. It
Oh,
determines which
this is not
videos
an ad.
succeed, which ones don't, and which ones you end up seeing recommended. But it doesn't always line up with the kinds of videos I'm producing here that I think you guys will end up enjoying watching.
I think this is an ad. This is an ad. Yes, I know this is an ad. This is an ad. Yeah. I felt it that it was going to be an ad. So, yeah, this summarizes or that summarizes the entirety of the video. But yeah, we've said it before and we're going to say it again. It's just a small island, but with everything, it's mind blowing. And yeah, let me just say this. And I think I said that, but I'm still just gonna say it again or buttress on it because lots of people, when they hear invade or whatever, they just want to associate it to the bad things or to be like, oh, they invaded, they collected this, they took that, and that. Listen, from what I know, or from based on lots of the videos that I've checked in regards regarding history, yeah, there was still some good done in the work in everything, and I still think that people need to also look at the good sides of things, right? Because this this country, I don't even want to use invade, because I think that invasion kind of mean that, oh, they took over, when in real sense it may not even be that, because they came, and lots of the countries that have their independence today, or who are independent today, nations that are standing today as like strong, whatever the name may be or whatever it may be, they came as a result of Britain coming to help them or assisting them or whatever. And when you look at it, it may not even necessarily be in the bad light. And why do you think? Why do you think that regardless, Britain is still standing today? Great Britain is still standing today because regardless, there was still good that came out of what they did. There was still some good that they did. Talk about the bad things, but let me even say this, because I understand people be like, oh, bad things happened in history. Yes, bad things happened, good things also happened. But people always associate the bad things with collective group. But when the good things happen, they only associate it with individual. Why? When in real sense, most of the time or majority of the time, when the bad things happen, it is always one person who might be the person that would influence that. But when the good happens, they don't associate the good with a group or in a group. Why is that? So yeah, there was still some good that came out of this, but I don't even want to use the word invasion. I'm trying to find the right word to use that will make total sense. Because lots of people, when they hear invasion, they be like, oh, this country came and they collected or they forcefully. That's what people would think when they hear invasion. They think it's forcefully. But if you learn history or if you do your findings, you will understand that back in the day, lots of people or lots of nations, this was how they knew how to survive. This was how they knew how to survive, in the sense that we are so lucky today that we are not experiencing any of that in terms of war, in terms of people being brutal, or with the level of brutality that happened back in the day. We're so grateful and thankful. We're so lucky, and I'm just gonna say it. Thank goodness that none of that is happening today. All thanks to who? To the British Empire or to Great Britain, regardless. And we're just gonna say it. But look at it. Just a small island, but look at the power they've got. And there was still good that came out of it. There was still some good. But yeah, I know not everybody's gonna feel the same way or feel the exact same way. But this is just to tell you that sometimes when you learn history, don't just pick out the bad things. I always want to learn history from a neutral base. on neutral basis to look at, like, okay, what happened? They were good and they were bad as well. That's how it is. That's how I love to learn history, and I wish people would just learn it on a neutral basis and come to understand how things came to be, instead of just learning or understanding, or just watching or learning from a judgmental point of view. Makes no sense, because when you learn any other thing that you want to listen to, you will not interest you, because you're just clouded with want to focus only on the bad things. It makes no sense. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. And until next time, see you in the next video.